This week, as part of our run up to Climate Week NYC, we are exploring the environmental justice theme, one of the 10 themes taking place at Climate Week NYC. And I'm really delighted to be joined today by Tjada McKenna, CEO of Mercy Corps. Tjada, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. We know your work really, really well. We've done so much stuff with Mercy Corps in the past. But for those who may well be a little bit less well acquainted, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about the work that you folks do?
Yes, no, thank you. And it's such an honor to be here. Mercy Corps, the way I like to describe Mercy Corps is our goal is to build thriving, inclusive, and resilient communities. We work in countries and in places that are affected by climate change, poverty, and conflict. And what we do in those communities that are affected by those things is we provide development assistance, immediate humanitarian assistance in the case of disasters or other emergencies, and we do all of that with a lens towards peace building and conflict avoidance. Like the main things you'll see us working on are things around access to food, clean water, economic opportunities, and income opportunities, and community cohesion.
And you've
We are,
spoken, oh, sorry, I'll let you carry on.
no, I should add that we're in over 30 countries around the world doing this work, and we're a team of a little bit over 4,000 people.
And you've spoken before about the vicious cycle between conflict and climate change. So, how does Mercy Corps navigate this intersection in its global humanitarian work?
Now, yeah, climate change and conflict reinforce each other in really dangerous ways, right? So when a drought wipes out crops or floods destroy homes, people are suddenly forced to compete for limited resources. So things like water, land, grazing areas, and they're competing for limited resources in places that already have weak institutions, maybe compromised governments, historic tensions. So that competition can really spark or escalate conflict. And then on the flip side, when conflict is ongoing or present, it's nearly impossible for communities to adapt to climate change, right? So that's kind of the vicious cycle. And this is particularly stark in countries that are really affected by conflict or what we consider fragile states. So I'm talking about places like Mali, Somalia, Afghanistan, Myanmar. So these places are more exposed to extreme weather. They rely heavily on natural resources to survive and really have the fewest tools to adapt and are really close to the edge. So we've been working at this intersection for over a decade in places like northern Nigeria or across the Sahel, trying to build resilience to both conflict and climate risk in those places. So our approach starts with this local analysis to understand like the specific things in each context. We listen to communities. About 95% of our staff are from the communities that we serve. So we rely on those insights to inform program design. And then we look at what we are doing to kind of harness nature-based solutions and technology to address mitigation where possible. So a good example of this is in Uganda. We've helped communities develop these shared agreements to manage natural resources like water and pasture to reduce tensions between farmers and pastoralists during the dry season. And a similar approach in Sahel, where climate change is really acting as a real force multiplier in terms of exacerbating fragility and disrupting markets and displacing people. One of our programs, we've supported over 2,500 people to better adapt to climate change, like improving their agricultural yields, strengthening local land governance, training community-led natural resource management, creating committees, building that social cohesion, and building that muscle for inclusive decision making, so that together people can approach solutions like in good times and as times become more threatened by other situations.
One of the things I think people are always very surprised by is the fact that the impacts of climate change are already being felt incredibly severely in these communities, especially the communities that you're serving. I was wondering, could you maybe give an example of some of the impacts that perhaps you've seen that people might not have otherwise understood to this point?
Yeah, climate, the thing that's that's really frustrating, and I know we're talking a lot about justice this week, is that the communities that have done the least to contribute to climate change are the ones that are most effective. And so much of the funding has gone towards mitigation, but not enough in terms of helping people who are in situations where they're being affected by this to adapt to these things day to day. And I think we often people think about climate as like a loftier long-term thing, and we often miss the real impacts. So a great example of just like what this really looks like day to day for someone. On my last visit to Somalia, I was there when they were in the throes of one of their worst droughts in 40 years after 4 seasons of failed rain. So 90% of the country was in drought. More than 200,000 people had faced the very real prospect of starvation. And there are also ongoing militant groups in some places, and conflicts had prevented people from planting and harvesting. So when the water sources dried up, many of the people that we served at that time were pastoralists. And so their herds were literally dying, and so there were no crops. Herds were dying, and people were literally starving. So as people were starving, they started to travel down from their areas towards cities to get food. So there were all these kind of camps that had sprouted up. And I met two mothers just in one day of meeting in the camp, whose children had died, who had children who died of malnutrition during this period. And the deaths of those children both happened to occur as these families were journeying on foot with the few animals that may have remained and everything they had. They were journeying on foot for days to get to a place where they could access food and services. And one of the mothers talked to me about burying a child on the side of the road, and having to keep going so that her other children who also were suffering could get help to prevent the death of more of the children. So I mean, these are real life, very stark examples of what happens to communities that have been devastated by climate disasters and just the impact of that. And I think, in the past, places had drought. We just assume that's necessary, but now we know with climate change, they're much worse than they were before. They come much more frequently, and sometimes when people talk about funding for climate, they're not talking about funding to help people who are facing these desperate situations, and how to prevent them from being in these desperate situations to begin with.
One of the things that I've always found very inspiring when I've been out on the field is the fact that in a lot of these communities, amongst indigenous groups as well, um, there are a lot of solutions coming from the communities also. And the magic is providing people with the opportunity to unlock those solutions so that they can have a positive impact in the areas that they live. I wonder if you've got any examples of where you've worked with local communities and groups to help unlock that power for them to support these issues themselves.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, in local communities, people who like live in these environments, they know them better than anyone else. And in fact, even when I started in this work field 15 to 20 years ago, there were smallholder farmers talking to me about climate change without using those words. We maybe
Yeah.
didn't use them, but oh, the seasons were changing. So it's really important that we absorb indigenous knowledge, and that we place that knowledge and that local leadership as the center of the solution. Like they are their own heroes, right? Like they
Mm.
know what it takes. So um pastoralists don't just raise animals, they manage ecosystems. So using, like, and that's why I mentioned earlier that like over 95% of our staff are from the communities where we work, and we always start with a period of like deep listening and talking, and understanding like what has worked, what the different things to address are, and we really prioritize bottoms up participatory approaches. So the communities develop their own priorities based on local risk and realities, and then also what those solutions could be, and where we have knowledge of other tools or things we've learned in other places, we've added that. But we really like co-designing solutions is a huge part of the plan, and that also ensures that what you are doing is sustainable and that communities can like adopt the processes and the things over time. Because it's just critical for actually lasting, sustainable things that work for figuring that out.
And of course, the United States is not immune to extreme weather disasters as well. We saw the fires in California and recently the flooding in Texas, which was awful to see. I wonder, you're talking about the local knowledge in these places. I would imagine there's probably some sort of innovations and ideas taking place around the world that maybe the United States might be able to learn from as well. Do you think there's like a sort of two-way knowledge exchange on this?
Yeah, I think there could be a two-way knowledge exchange, and I think even in the U.S., it would be good if we had conversations that talked about this community level resilience and building these approaches, and just even that approach of like what works, and talking about things ahead of time. Maybe we've left it to government officials or each household just takes up their own cause, but the more that we share information and collectively plan and know who to go to in a time of crisis or know how to alert each other, those are step one, like that
Yeah.
basic community knowledge.
And this is Environmental Justice Week, but it's not just a week. We'll be doing things all the way in the lead up to Climate Week NYC and beyond. It would be great to get your thoughts on. Everyone has a different interpretation of what environmental justice means, and I think people have perhaps adjusted that over the recent months as well. What, from your point of view, is your interpretation? What does environmental justice mean for you within the context of the work that you're leading on globally?
I think about environmental justice as being really all about power and leadership. So true environmental justice means that those communities that have been hardest hit by climate change but have done the least to cause it are not seen as victims but as leaders of the
Yeah.
solution. It means making sure those communities have the funds, tools, and resources to access decision making spaces to shape their own future. It also means like shifting how we think about investment and power. So these communities understand that their reality is far better than anyone else. They know what works, and really investing in them and making the investments to so that they can be resilient when things hit. I think the private sector also plays like a key role in helping to scale these solutions. Some private capital is directed towards community-led initiatives. We need more of that to fuel innovation, to unlock local capacity and local leaders, and to really accelerate the impact in this space. So it is about the access to resources, access to power, and the ability to lead, and having the freedom to lead and to be seen implicitly as the leaders.
So we're talking about some big things there. We're talking about leadership, about power, about investment and policy as well. I wonder, looking ahead to Climate Week NYC, but just more in general, both in the United States and around the world, what other sort of big dramatic policy shifts or investment shifts from the private sector that you would want to see in order to support and enable the change in the right direction?
Yeah, so a few things, really turning the system on its head, and thinking about like not just going to the usual places in terms of investment or where capital goes, right? Like go directly to those communities that are being served. One of the most urgent shifts we need is for climate finance to actually reach fragile and conflict affected places, or just more poor places here in the US. The more fragile a country or a community is, the less climate finance it receives. And so those are communities on the front line. That's where we have to invest. We also have to be clear-eyed really about what private capital can realistically deliver in these settings. Like, so these settings are unpredictable by nature. You know, private investors aren't equipped to take on that level of risk. And
Yeah.
so really
Yeah.
bridging that gap is going to require better public investment and more support from philanthropic actors willing to fund adaptation and resilience efforts where markets can't or simply won't go here. Um, Companies, private sector, even if they're not ready to make those investments, they can help by funding pilots, testing new models, seeing how their technologies work in underserved places, making sure that they can be adapted, and providing solutions to help get things off the ground. So I think as much as we can work together to de-risk local markets and back local actors, we make it possible to deliver long-term impact. And I think that's just as true in communities in the U.S. that have been marginalized as it is in places where we work, like Ethiopia or Afghanistan or Myanmar.
I think New York City is home to one of the most sort of concentrated, concentrated focuses on environmental justice as an issue. You know, the environmental justice theme is one of the most popular themes at Climate Week NYC. We've hosted hundreds of events over the years, and a lot of younger people come into Climate Week NYC maybe for the first time. You know, they'll be going to these events because they want to find out more about the issue, but mostly they want to find out what they can do to make a difference. From your perspective, what advice would you give to young people who want to get involved in this movement and find out more and maybe make a difference themselves?
Yeah, I think where people can, and obviously we're all in different circumstances or live in different places, but where you can get involved in a community level, or even if you just kind of try to pick a community, get to know who some of those like entrepreneurs are, who are the local actors looking at climate, like what are
Mm.
the different, who are the different players in the ecosystem, and like how are you best used? So, you know, some of them might say, hey, like we need you to do advocacy or to sign petitions or to get lawmakers to help us with this bill, or we need you to help us raise money to do this program, or depending on the skill set, you know, they could just like need volunteers to do certain things. But I think starting with like go to those actors that are already working in these spaces and learn and then see what you can contribute. And then when you have chances to actually physically go into those communities, like go understand, like get to know those actors, get to know their environments. It just it adds to that knowledge. But even if it's, you know, things as small as helping spread awareness about a law or about an organization, it just makes a world of difference.
And I'd also probably add, if you can donate money, you cannot underestimate the
Not
importance.
underestimate. Yes, no, and you know, money is far more efficient than anything else because then, you know, I talked a little bit about really power and shifting that power and letting people take the lead in their success stories. And money allows them to like buy what they need or hire
Yeah.
who they need or do other things. More than other things. So that's always that should always be the number one thing. But I know you said young people especially, and so people are in different stages, and even spreading awareness so that others can will give them money is just as helpful in some cases.
Well, that's the plan. They go to Climate Week NYC, attend as many, events as possible to learn more, so you can lobby your parents to donate money. That could be a new strategy we're going for here.
And to explain to people like why it matters and why it impacts like you know every single aspect of someone's life and you know what's the world we want to see for tomorrow, like you know
Yeah.
let's make that best world happen now.
Final question from me. Mercy Corps has been really involved in Climate Week NYC over the years. I'd love to get your perspective on how are major sort of global climate events like Climate Week NYC useful for the work that you do? What are the sorts of meetings, collaborations, events, and things that how do they benefit the sort of the work that Mercy Corps does?
It's really it's these kinds of four are critical, like on a few dimensions. One, they bring different actors together, and it is, I get the most steps in the year when I go to like a climate week or another gathering like that. But the opportunity to like really engage with a lot of different actors working on the same thing from different angles is invaluable in our work. The other piece too is in terms of like setting standards, amplifying, sharing results, really helping us learn to be better, but really making, helping people to understand what the needs are and what the call to action is. And I think the third most important thing too is, fora, especially like UN meetings or UN meetings or like these things like Climate Week, they really help to set an agenda for what
Yeah.
the action steps should be, and what is acceptable, right? Like what should our goals be, or what are our targets, or what are the red lines, right? And I think like having those places to really debate and coalesce around certain ideas about what you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it really helps people to move along in a collective way towards a collective mission.
Oh, Jada McKenna, CEO of Mercy Corps. It's been really great speaking with you today. We are publishing starting this week events taking place across Climate Week NYC. It will be updated weekly, and you can, as in previous years, click on the environmental justice theme so you can filter to have a look at all those events taking place. As I say, updated weekly, and I know that Mercy Corps will be involved in many of those events. So if you want to find out more, please do check it out. But Jada McKenna, thank you so much for speaking with me today, and I look forward to seeing you at Climate Week NYC this coming September 21st through to the 28th.
Awesome. Can't wait. Thank you.